The morning I woke up to find a $300 fine taped to my front door for not shoveling my driveway within 12 hours of the last snowfall was the morning I decided that Patricia Morrison had finally crossed a line I could not ignore. I stood there in my thermal pajamas and wool socks, coffee mug steaming in the 15-degree air that rushed through my open doorway, staring at the bright orange violation notice that flapped against the wood. My name, Harold Denton, was printed in bold letters across the top, followed by a detailed explanation of how I had violated Section 7.3 of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association covenant regarding snow removal from driveways, walkways, and any visible property areas within the designated time frame. The thing was, I had shoveled. I had spent 2 hours yesterday afternoon clearing every inch of my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my house here in Boulder, Colorado. My back still ached from the effort. But apparently, according to Patricia Morrison, president of the Pinewood Heights HOA and the most insufferable woman I had ever had the misfortune of living near, I had not completed the task within the 12-hour window. The snow had stopped at 6 in the morning yesterday, and I had not finished shoveling until 8:30 that evening, because I had been at work all day at the engineering firm downtown where I designed water treatment systems. I ripped the notice off my door and went back inside, slamming it hard enough to rattle the frame. My golden retriever, Ranger, looked up from his bed by the fireplace with concerned brown eyes. I scratched him behind the ears and tried to calm down, but the anger was already building in my chest like a pressure cooker about to blow. This was not the first time Patricia had targeted me. Ever since I had moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago, she had made it her personal mission to make my life difficult. There was the time she fined me because my grass was half an inch too tall, according to her measuring tape. The time she tried to force me to repaint my shutters because the shade of blue was not on the approved color list, even though it matched perfectly with the samples at the hardware store. The time she claimed my mailbox was 2 inches too far to the left of the acceptable placement zone. I was tired of it. I was tired of paying fines for violations that were either completely fabricated or so minor that no reasonable person would care. I was tired of getting nasty letters in the mail. I was tired of Patricia Morrison treating this neighborhood like her personal fiefdom where she could lord her petty authority over everyone who lived here. I pulled out my phone and checked the weather forecast. Another storm was coming. A big one. The meteorologists were calling it a historic blizzard that would dump 3 feet of snow on the Front Range over the next 48 hours. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Whiteout conditions. The governor was already talking about declaring a state of emergency. An idea began to form in my mind. A terrible, petty, absolutely perfect idea. I spent the rest of the morning researching the HOA covenants, reading through every single page of the dense legal document that I had signed when I purchased my house. I found what I was looking for in Section 12.8, which dealt with common area maintenance responsibilities. The HOA was responsible for maintaining all shared spaces, including the main entrance to the neighborhood, the community center parking lot, and the walking paths that wound through the development. More importantly, I found a clause that stated homeowners were only required to maintain their individual properties during weather events. There was no requirement for homeowners to assist with common area maintenance, even in emergencies. That was solely the responsibility of the HOA board and whatever contractors they hired. The entrance to Pinewood Heights was on the north side of the development, accessible only via Pinewood Drive, which connected to Highway 36. It was a narrow road that wound up a slight hill, with decorative stone pillars on either side and a fancy wooden sign that proclaimed the neighborhood name in gold letters. During normal conditions, it was picturesque. During a blizzard, it would become impassable very quickly without constant plowing, and I knew for a fact that Patricia Morrison lived on the south end of the neighborhood, which meant she would need to use that main entrance to get in and out. There was no back way, no alternate route. Just that single access point that the HOA was responsible for maintaining. I smiled for the first time that morning. The blizzard hit that evening around 6 o'clock. I had spent the afternoon preparing, stocking up on food, batteries, firewood, and everything else I might need to ride out the storm in comfort. My house was on the east side of the neighborhood, close enough to the entrance that I could walk there in 10 minutes under normal conditions. I had a clear view of Pinewood Drive from my living room window. The snow started as light flurries that quickly intensified into thick, heavy flakes that reduced visibility to almost nothing. The wind howled around the corners of my house, creating drifts that piled up against the fence in my backyard. I sat by the window with Ranger at my feet, drinking hot chocolate and watching the storm rage outside. My phone buzzed with emergency alerts warning people to stay off the roads. The news showed footage of cars abandoned on the highway, snow plows struggling to keep up with accumulation rates of 3 inches per hour. The city had activated its emergency operations center. Schools were already canceled for tomorrow. Around 9 o'clock, I saw the first set of headlights trying to navigate up Pinewood Drive toward the entrance pillars. The vehicle, a small sedan that had no business being out in these conditions, made it about halfway up the hill before the wheels started spinning uselessly. I watched as the driver tried to back down, fishtailing dangerously before finally managing to turn around and head back into the neighborhood. The snow kept falling. By midnight, there had to be at least 18 inches on the ground, with drifts twice that height in places where the wind had piled it up. Pinewood Drive was completely buried. The decorative entrance pillars were barely visible, just dark shapes in the white chaos. I went to bed satisfied, knowing that by morning the entrance would be completely impassable. I woke up at 7 to the sound of my phone ringing. I ignored it. It rang again 5 minutes later, and again 5 minutes after that. I finally picked it up and saw that I had 12 missed calls and 23 text messages. Most were from Patricia Morrison. The text started out relatively calm, asking if anyone had heard from the snow removal company that the HOA had contracted with. Then they became more urgent, stating that the entrance was blocked and nobody could get out. Then they became angry, demanding to know why nobody was doing anything about it. The final few were directed specifically at me, apparently because someone had told Patricia that I had a snow blower and a truck with 4-wheel drive. I deleted the messages without responding and made myself breakfast. The calls continued throughout the morning. Patricia. Other HOA board members, neighbors asking if I could help dig out the entrance. I let every single call go to voicemail. I was not required to help with common area maintenance. That was in the covenants, black and white, section 12.8. The HOA had a responsibility to maintain that entrance, not me. Around noon, there was a heavy knock on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Patricia Morrison standing on my porch, bundled in an expensive-looking parka with fur trim around the hood. Her face was red from the cold and her expression was furious. I opened the door but left the storm door latched. "Yes, Harold, we need your help," she said, her breath creating clouds in the frozen air. "The entrance is completely blocked. Nobody can get in or out. We have people who need to get to work, medical appointments." The snow removal company cannot get here because the roads are too bad. That sounds like a problem, I said neutrally, her eyes narrowed. You have a snow blower and a truck. We need you to help clear the entrance. I am not required to maintain common areas, I replied. That is the HOA's responsibility according to Section 12.8 of the covenants. The same covenants you used to fine me $300 yesterday for not shoveling my driveway fast enough. Patricia's face went from red to purple. This is an emergency situation. We need everyone to pitch in. Then, perhaps you should have thought about that before you spent the last 3 years harassing me with frivolous fines and violations, I said. I am sure the snow removal company will be able to get here eventually. Until then, nobody is required to go anywhere. The governor recommended everyone stay home anyway. You are being incredibly selfish, Patricia hissed. There are people who have legitimate needs to leave the neighborhood. Then they can walk out to the highway and call an Uber, I suggested. It is only about 200 yards through the snow. Difficult, but not impossible. Or the HOA board could get some shovels and start digging. I hear physical labor is good for stress relief. I closed the door in her face before she could respond. Through the window, I watched her stomp back down my driveway, slipping twice on the packed snow I had not bothered to clear from this morning. The calls and messages continued all afternoon. Some neighbors were understanding when I explained that I was not required to help. Others were angry, accusing me of being petty and vindictive. I did not deny it. I was being petty. I was being vindictive. And it felt absolutely wonderful. By evening, the storm had intensified even further. The wind was strong enough to shake my windows in their frames. The snow had reached over 2 feet on level ground, with drifts up to 5 or 6 feet in places. Pinewood Drive was completely buried under what had to be at least 4 feet of snow, sculpted into strange shapes by the relentless wind. I made dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed early. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The temperature had dropped to 5 below zero overnight. The sun, reflecting off the fresh snow, was blindingly bright. I made coffee and looked out my window at the winter wonderland that had buried the neighborhood. Pinewood Drive was invisible. The entire road had become part of the surrounding landscape, indistinguishable from the yards and open spaces around it. The entrance pillars were buried up to their tops. The decorative wooden sign was completely covered. It would take days to dig out, even with professional equipment. My phone started ringing at 8 in the morning. I let it go to voicemail. I had shoveling to do. I spent 3 hours carefully clearing my driveway, sidewalk, and the path to my mailbox. I made sure every inch was perfect, down to bare pavement, with neat edges and no loose snow anywhere that could be construed as a violation. I took photos documenting my work, noting the time stamp. I was not going to give Patricia any excuse to fine me again. When I finished, I noticed several of my neighbors were outside as well, some clearing their own driveways, others gathered in small groups talking and gesturing toward the buried entrance. A few waved at me. Most ignored me. I was clearly not popular at the moment. Around noon, a woman I recognized as Linda Shaw, one of the other HOA board members, came trudging through the snow toward my house. Unlike Patricia, Linda had always been reasonable in her dealings with me. She was in her early 50s, a retired teacher who usually tried to moderate Patricia's worst impulses. I met her at the door. "Hello, Linda." "Harold, can we talk?" she asked. She looked exhausted. I invited her inside and offered her coffee, which she accepted gratefully. We sat at my kitchen table and she wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I know you are angry about the fine," she said. "And honestly, I voted against it, Patricia pushed it through anyway. She has been difficult lately. That is putting it mildly, I said. Linda sighed. I am not here to ask you to help dig out the entrance, although we could certainly use it. I am here to ask if we can come to some kind of agreement. Several people in the neighborhood have genuine emergencies. Martha Henderson needs to get to dialysis treatments. Tom Bridger's wife is 9 months pregnant. We have an elderly couple who are running low on medication. I felt a twinge of guilt. I had not considered that my petty revenge might actually hurt innocent people. Why cannot emergency services reach them? They can, but it requires the fire department's specialized snow rescue vehicle, and they are overwhelmed with calls all over the county. Nobody is dying immediately, but the situation is not sustainable. I thought about it for a moment. I will make you a deal. I will help clear the entrance on one condition. Patricia Morrison resigns from the HOA board. Linda's eyes widened. Harold, I cannot make that happen. She has to resign voluntarily or be voted out by the homeowners. Then I guess you have a problem, I said. Because I am not lifting a finger to help as long as that woman has any authority in this neighborhood. She has made my life hell for 3 years. She can experience a little inconvenience herself. Linda stared at me for a long moment. You are really willing to let people suffer because of a personal grudge. I am willing to let the HOA board experience the consequences of putting someone like Patricia Morrison in charge, I corrected. This is not about a grudge. This is about accountability. She fined me $300 for not shoveling fast enough during a work day. She has fined me thousands of dollars over the years for violations that were either made up or so technical that nobody else would care. She has made this neighborhood miserable for me, and from what I hear, several other people as well. So yes, I am willing to let everyone be inconvenienced until she is no longer in a position of authority. Linda stood up slowly. I will talk to the other board members. But I cannot promise anything. Then I cannot promise I will help, I replied. She left without another word. The rest of the day passed quietly. I worked from home, attending video meetings and answering emails about the water treatment project my team was designing for a small town on the western slope. My coworkers complained about the snow and the cold. I mostly stayed quiet, not mentioning the situation brewing in my neighborhood. That evening, I heard raised voices outside. I looked out to see a group of about 15 people gathered in the middle of the street, bundled in winter gear. Patricia Morrison was there, gesturing dramatically. Several people were pointing in the direction of my house. I had a feeling I knew what was coming. Sure enough, 20 minutes later the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia, Linda, and 2 other HOA board members, Dennis Harper and Carol Fleming, standing on my porch. Behind them, the group from the street had followed, keeping a distance but clearly watching. Harold Denton, the HOA board would like to speak with you, Patricia said formally, as if this were an official proceeding. I am listening, I said, not inviting them in. Dennis, a heavy-set man in his 60s who owned a car dealership in Denver, stepped forward. Look, Harold, we understand you are upset, but we have a serious situation here. We need to get the entrance cleared. We are prepared to offer you a full refund of the snow shoveling fine and a written apology from the board. Not interested, I said. Patricia made a disgusted noise. You are being ridiculous. This is bigger than your petty complaints about HOA enforcement. My petty complaints. I felt my temper rising. You have fined me for grass height, mailbox placement, shutter colors, and now snow removal timing. You have cost me thousands of dollars over the years. You have sent me threatening letters about foreclosure if I do not pay your made-up fines. You have made living here absolutely miserable, And now you want me to help you because you failed to plan for a snow emergency that was forecasted 3 days in advance. The snow removal company is under contract, Patricia snapped. This is not our fault. Actually, it is, I said. The HOA is responsible for common area maintenance. If your contractor could not fulfill their obligations, you should have had a backup plan. That is what responsible management looks like. But instead, you were too busy measuring grass height and finding excuses to fine people. Carol Fleming, a quiet woman who usually went along with whatever Patricia wanted, spoke up. What do you want, Harold? What will it take for you to help? Patricia Morrison needs to resign from the HOA board, I said clearly, loudly enough that the neighbors watching could hear. She is a terrible president who has abused her authority and made this neighborhood worse for everyone. I want her gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's face went through several shades of red and purple. You cannot force me to resign. I was elected by the homeowners. You are right. I cannot force you, I agreed. But I can refuse to help until you do, and based on the looks I am getting from the people behind you, I do not think I am the only one who feels this way. I looked past the board members to the gathered neighbors. How many of you have been fined by Patricia for things that did not matter? How many of you have been harassed about minor violations while real problems in the neighborhood get ignored? How many of you are actually happy with how the HOA is being run? Several people shifted uncomfortably. A few raised their hands. One man called out, "She fined me $500 because my kid left a basketball hoop in the driveway overnight." Another voice, "She tried to make us remove our vegetable garden because it was not ornamental enough." A woman I did not recognize. She threatened to foreclose on our house over a $150 fine for having the wrong porch light fixture. Patricia whirled around. Those were all legitimate covenant violations. I was doing my job. Your job is to maintain property values and create a pleasant community, I said. Not to be a petty tyrant who makes everyone miserable. So here is my offer, one time only. You resign from the board right now in front of all these witnesses, and I will spend the rest of the evening helping to dig out the entrance. I have a truck, a snow blower, and shovels. I will get it done, but only if you resign first. Patricia looked at Linda, then at Dennis and Carol. She looked at the crowd of neighbors, many of whom were nodding in agreement with my terms. She looked back at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "This is extortion," she said. "No, this is consequences," I replied. "Something you have never had to face before. Make your choice." The standoff lasted for almost a minute. Finally, Linda said quietly, "Patricia, maybe it is time. This has gotten out of hand." Dennis nodded reluctantly. "The neighborhood needs that entrance cleared, if this is what it takes." Patricia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a moment, I thought she might actually hit someone. Then she took a deep breath and said in a voice dripping with venom, "Fine. I resign. Effective immediately. I resign from the Pinewood Heights HOA board." A small cheer went up from some of the neighbors. I felt a surge of satisfaction that I tried to keep off my face. "I want it in writing," I said. "An email to all homeowners from your official HOA email address." Patricia pulled out her phone and typed furiously, her fingers stabbing at the screen. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I opened it and read, "To all Pinewood Heights residents, effective immediately, I am resigning from my position as HOA president and board member. Linda Shaw will assume the role of interim president until the next election. Patricia Morrison." It was curt and angry, but it was official. "Good enough," I said. "Give me an hour to get my equipment ready." I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. Ranger came over and I scratched his ears, taking a moment to process what had just happened. I had actually done it. I had gotten rid of Patricia Morrison. Then I put on my winter gear and got to work. I started by hooking up my snow blower to my truck and driving as close to the entrance as I could get before the snow became too deep. Several neighbors had joined me, bringing shovels and willing hands. Even Dennis Harper was out there, despite being older and clearly not used to physical labor. The work was brutal. Even with the snow blower, it took hours to cut a path through the massive drifts blocking Pinewood Drive. My back screamed in protest. My hands were numb despite the heavy gloves. My face felt like it might crack from the cold. But I kept going, fueled by the satisfaction of knowing that Patricia Morrison was no longer in charge. By 10 o'clock that night, we had cleared a single lane from the neighborhood entrance down to where Pinewood Drive connected to the main road. It was not perfect, but it was passable. A few brave souls with four-wheel drive vehicles ventured out, testing the path. They made it through successfully. Martha Henderson's son was able to drive in and pick her up for her dialysis appointment the next morning. Tom Bridger's wife made it to the hospital in time, though thankfully the baby decided to wait another week before making an appearance. The elderly couple got their medication refilled. Crisis averted. I spent the next day recovering, sore in muscles I had forgotten I had. My phone was full of thank you messages from neighbors, many of whom also expressed their relief that Patricia was gone. Apparently, I was not the only one she had been terrorizing. Linda called me 3 days after the blizzard. "Harold, the board would like to have a conversation with you when you have time." I agreed to meet her at the community center, which had finally been dug out and had power restored. Linda was there with Dennis and Carol, sitting at a table in the main room where HOA meetings were usually held. "First, thank you for your help with the entrance," Linda said. "We would not have managed it without you." I nodded. "You are welcome." "Second, we need to discuss the fine Patricia issued you," Dennis said, pushing a piece of paper across the table. "We are formally voiding it and issuing you a refund check. We reviewed the timeline and the covenant requirements, and we agree that the fine was not justified. You cleared your property as soon as you reasonably could." I took the check, $300, plus a written apology on official HOA letterhead. "Additionally," Linda continued, "we have been reviewing all the fines Patricia issued over the past 3 years. There are some concerning patterns. Many of them appear to be either excessive or not actually supported by the covenants. We are going to be reaching out to affected homeowners about potential refunds." "That is good to hear," I said. Carol spoke up for the first time. "We also wanted to ask if you would be interested in joining the HOA board. We need someone who is not afraid to push back and ask tough questions. Someone who actually reads the covenants and cares about fair enforcement." I was surprised. "You want me on the board, after what just happened?" "Especially after what just happened," Linda said. "You were right, Harold. Patricia had become a problem and none of us had the courage to stand up to her. You did. The neighborhood needs more people like that involved in governance." I thought about it. The idea of being part of the HOA that had made my life miserable for 3 years was not appealing. On the other hand, the idea of being able to prevent anyone else from experiencing what I had gone through was very appealing. "I will think about it," I said. Linda smiled. "That is all we ask." Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The snow melted, then more fell, then melted again in the unpredictable pattern of Colorado winter weather. The HOA hired a new snow removal company with better equipment and a more reliable contract. Several homeowners received refund checks for unjustified fines. I eventually agreed to join the HOA board. running unopposed in a special election to fill Patricia's vacant seat. My first priority was working with Linda to revise the covenant enforcement procedures, adding clear guidelines about reasonable violations, appropriate fine amounts, and an appeals process for homeowners who felt they had been unfairly targeted. Patricia Morrison moved out of the neighborhood 3 months later. I heard through the grapevine that she had bought a condo in Denver, something with no HOA where she could not impose her will on anyone else. I felt a sense of relief when I saw the moving truck in her driveway. The most satisfying moment came during a board meeting 6 months after the blizzard. We were reviewing the neighborhood finances, and I noticed something interesting in the records. "Linda, what is this line item for legal expenses related to covenant enforcement?" I asked, pointing to a figure that was over $15,000. She sighed. Patricia was pursuing several legal actions against homeowners who refused to pay fines. She was convinced we could foreclose on properties to collect. Our attorney advised against it, but she pushed forward anyway. None of the cases went anywhere. Dennis shook his head. We dropped all of them after she resigned. Complete waste of HOA funds. I did some quick mental math. So the neighborhood spent $15,000 on Patricia's vendetta against people who would not pay her questionable fines, money that could have been used for actual improvements or maintenance. Essentially, yes, Linda admitted. That seems like something the homeowners should know about, I said. We included the information in the next quarterly newsletter, laying out exactly how much money had been wasted on unnecessary legal fees during Patricia's tenure. The response from the neighborhood was swift and angry. Several people called for a full audit of HOA finances during her time as president. The audit revealed even more problems. Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, justifying them as research or neighborhood evaluation costs. Dinners at expensive restaurants claimed as meetings with vendors. A weekend trip to Vail claimed as a conference on HOA management. New furniture for her home office claimed as equipment for HOA administrative work. In total, she had misappropriated over $20,000 from HOA funds. Linda called an emergency board meeting. "This is fraud. We need to involve the police." I agreed. So did Dennis and Carol. We filed a report with the Boulder Police Department, turning over all the financial records and documentation we had found. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, Patricia tried to argue that everything had been legitimate expenses, that she was being persecuted by a vindictive HOA board. But the evidence was overwhelming. Credit card receipts showed personal purchases. Calendar records showed she had not actually attended the conferences she claimed. The furniture she bought was photographed in her home by the police, clearly personal items and not office equipment. The district attorney decided to prosecute. Patricia Morrison was charged with theft, fraud, and misappropriation of funds. The case was straightforward enough that her attorney advised her to take a plea deal rather than go to trial. I attended the sentencing hearing along with Linda and several other neighbors. Patricia stood before the judge, looking smaller and older than I remembered. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Morrison, you held a position of trust in your community. You were elected to manage shared resources and maintain property values for your neighbors. Instead, you abused that trust to enrich yourself and to pursue personal vendettas against people you should have been serving. This kind of behavior undermines the entire concept of community governance." Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in jail, with credit for time served and possibility of parole after 9 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus fines and court costs. Her attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. As we left the courthouse, Linda turned to me. "I never thought it would come to this when you refused to help dig out the entrance." "Neither did I admitted. "I just wanted her to leave me alone. I had no idea about the financial fraud." "But if you had not pushed back, if you had not forced her resignation, we never would have looked closely at the finances. She would still be in charge, still abusing her authority." Dennis, walking behind us, added, "and still making everyone miserable with her petty fines and rules." We stood outside the courthouse in the bright Colorado sunshine. It was spring now, the snow long gone, replaced by green grass and blooming flowers. The mountains in the distance were still capped with white, but the valleys were warm and alive. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we do the boring work of actually managing a homeowner association properly," Linda said with a smile. "Maintaining property values, organizing community events, fixing streetlights and signs. All the things we should have been doing all along instead of measuring grass height." The next HOA board meeting was the most pleasant one I had ever attended. We discussed resurfacing the tennis courts, which actually needed it. We talked about updating the playground equipment, which was getting old and potentially unsafe. We reviewed bids from landscaping companies to maintain the common areas. Normal, reasonable business. One homeowner attended to complain about his neighbor's dog barking at all hours. We listened, suggested he try talking to the neighbor first, and offered to send a friendly letter if that did not work. No fines, no threats, just reasonable community problem solving. After the meeting, I walked home through the neighborhood as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Kids were playing basketball in driveways. People were walking dogs. Someone was grilling in their backyard, the smell of burgers drifting on the warm evening air. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to feel like. Not a collection of property owners living in fear of the HOA, but a community of people who actually liked living near each other. When I got home, Ranger greeted me at the door with his usual enthusiasm. I let him out in the backyard and stood on my porch, looking at my house. My grass was a little long. My shutters could probably use a fresh coat of paint. My mailbox was slightly crooked from where a snowplow had clipped it during the winter. And nobody was going to fine me for any of it unless it became an actual problem. I heard footsteps and turned to see my neighbor, Jeff Anderson, walking his black lab. Jeff and I had never been particularly close, but he had been one of the people who helped dig out the entrance during the blizzard. "Hey, Harold," he called out. "Nice evening." "Sure is," I agreed. He paused at the end of my driveway. "I never properly thanked you for what you did." Standing up to Patricia, I mean. She fined my wife and me $2,000 over 3 years for things that did not matter. We got most of it back after the board reviewed her enforcement actions. "I am glad you got your money back," I said. "It is not just the money. It is that someone finally had the guts to say enough is enough. You made this neighborhood livable again." He nodded and continued his walk, his dog pulling him along toward the next interesting smell. I went inside and made dinner, something simple and comfortable. While I ate, I thought about the chain of events that had started with a ridiculous fine for not shoveling fast enough. How refusing to help during the blizzard had led to Patricia's resignation, which had led to the discovery of her financial fraud, which had led to criminal charges, and a complete transformation of how the HOA operated. All because I had been petty enough to let the snow bury the entrance. Sometimes pettiness serves a purpose. Sometimes refusing to be reasonable in the face of unreasonable authority is exactly the right thing to do. Sometimes You have to let everything get buried before you can dig out and start fresh. I had learned something important over the past year. Community governance only works when the people in charge actually care about the community more than they care about power and control. Patricia had forgotten that, or maybe she had never understood it in the first place. She had seen the HOA as a way to impose her will on others, to force everyone to live according to her standards and preferences. But that is not what an HOA is supposed to be. It is supposed to be neighbors helping neighbors maintain property values and shared spaces. It is supposed to make life better, not worse. The next weekend, the HOA hosted a community cleanup day. Volunteers gathered to pick up litter, trim overgrown bushes along the walking paths, and touch up paint on the entrance pillars that had been dinged up by snow plows during the winter. I showed up with work gloves and a good attitude, ready to actually help instead of being forced to help under threat of fines. Linda brought donuts and coffee. Dennis provided pizza for lunch. Carol organized teams and handed out supplies. It was simple and wholesome and exactly what community involvement should look like. As I worked alongside my neighbors, scraping old paint off the stone pillars and chatting about nothing in particular, I realized how much had changed. A year ago, I had dreaded even stepping outside my house because Patricia might be lurking with her clipboard and her measuring tape, looking for violations to cite. Now, I was volunteering my time to improve the neighborhood because I actually wanted to, not because I was forced to. That evening, exhausted and covered in paint splatters, I drove home feeling genuinely good about where I lived. Ranger greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, completely unconcerned with HOA politics or community drama. I took him for a walk around the neighborhood, enjoying the warm spring evening and the sense that things were finally as they should be. When we got back, I found an envelope tucked into my front door. For a moment, my old instincts kicked in and I tensed, expecting another violation notice, another fine, another problem. But when I opened it, I found a thank you card signed by Martha Henderson, the woman who needed dialysis treatments. Dear Harold, thank you for helping clear the entrance during the blizzard. More importantly, thank you for having the courage to stand up to Patricia Morrison. She made many people's lives difficult, including mine. She once fined me for having a medical equipment delivery on a Tuesday, claiming large vehicles were only allowed on weekends. That fine was $250, and I am on a fixed income. Getting that money back thanks to the board review meant more than you know. This is a better neighborhood because of you. With gratitude, Martha. I put the card on my refrigerator, right next to the refund check I had framed as a reminder of what can happen when you stand your ground against petty tyranny. Life continued its normal rhythm. Summer came, hot and dry as Colorado summers tend to be. The HOA organized a community barbecue that was actually enjoyable. Kids played in the street while adults chatted and ate hamburgers and potato salad. There were no measuring tapes, no clipboards, no violation notices. Just neighbors being neighborly. I ran for a full term on the HOA board in the fall election and won easily. My campaign platform was simple: fair enforcement, transparent finances, and actually maintaining property values through reasonable standards rather than petty harassment. Apparently, that message resonated with voters who had spent years under Patricia's regime. The new board continued the work of reforming HOA operations. We simplified the covenant enforcement procedures, focusing on things that actually mattered like structural maintenance and safety issues, rather than grass height down to the eighth of an inch. We published detailed financial reports every quarter so homeowners could see exactly where their dues were going. We held open forum meetings where anyone could bring up concerns or suggestions without fear of retaliation. It was boring, responsible governance. And it was exactly what the neighborhood needed. Winter came again, as it always does in Colorado. When the first snow fell, I made sure to shovel my driveway within a reasonable time frame, not because I was afraid of fines, but because it was the right thing to do. The HOA's new snow removal company kept Pinewood Drive clear and accessible throughout the season. There were no emergencies, no buried entrances, no dramatic standoffs. It was blissfully uneventful. 1 year to the day after the blizzard that had changed everything, I stood at my living room window watching light snow fall on the neighborhood. Ranger slept by the fireplace, twitching occasionally in whatever dream dogs have. My coffee was hot and my house was warm. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Board meeting Thursday at 7 p.m. Agenda: spring landscaping bids, tennis court resurfacing, next quarter's newsletter. The exciting world of HOA governance continues. I smiled and texted back my confirmation. It was exciting in its own quiet way. Not because of drama or conflict, but because we were actually making the neighborhood better. Property values had gone up. People were friendlier. New families moving in commented on how welcoming and well-maintained everything was. All because one woman had pushed too far and had finally faced consequences for her actions. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering how she was doing. According to public records, she had been released from jail after serving 9 months and was now living in a small apartment in Westminster. She was on probation and working as a cashier at a grocery store, paying off her restitution debt month by month. Part of me felt bad for her. Her life had been completely upended by her own choices, her reputation destroyed, her freedom taken away. But another part of me remembered all the people she had harassed and bullied, all the money she had stolen, all the misery she had caused because she enjoyed having power over others. She had made her choices. She was living with the consequences. I finished my coffee and got ready for work. As I backed out of my driveway, carefully navigating the light coating of snow, I noticed my mailbox was slightly askew again. The snowplow must have clipped it. I made a mental note to straighten it this weekend, not because anyone would fine me if I did not, but because I actually cared about how my property looked. That is the difference between genuine pride of ownership and forced compliance. One comes from within, from actually valuing your home and neighborhood. The other comes from fear and resentment. The HOA should encourage the former, not enforce the latter. It had taken a blizzard, a standoff, and criminal charges to learn that lesson, but we had learned it. As I drove through the neighborhood toward Highway 36, I passed the entrance pillars with their freshly painted sign welcoming people to Pinewood Heights. The road was clear, well-maintained, safe. The way it should be. The way it would stay, as long as people like Patricia Morrison were never given unchecked authority again. I merged onto the highway and headed toward Denver, leaving the neighborhood behind. But I would be back that evening, and for many evenings to come. Because it was home now, truly home, in a way it had never been when Patricia was in charge. Sometimes you have to let everything get buried in snow before you can dig out and rebuild properly. Sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it seems petty or vindictive, because some battles need to be fought. And sometimes, just sometimes, refusing to shovel fast enough can lead to justice, reform, and a better community for everyone. The snow kept falling that winter, as it always does in Colorado. But Pinewood Heights was ready. We had good equipment, clear procedures, and an HOA board that actually cared about serving the community rather than controlling it. Most importantly, We had learned from our mistakes. We had learned what happens when authority goes unchecked, when petty power becomes tyranny, when process becomes more important than people. We had learned, and we would not forget. I never did frame that $300 fine that started everything, though I sometimes thought about it. Instead, I kept Martha Henderson's thank you card on my refrigerator as a reminder of what really mattered. Not winning petty battles or getting revenge on people who wronged you, but making life better for the people around you. That is what community is supposed to be about. That is what we had finally become. And it all started the morning I woke up to find a violation notice taped to my door, made a choice to stand my ground, and let the blizzard bury the entrance completely. Best decision I ever made.